people look to senior leadership and they say, oh, well, that's not important. You're not taking it seriously, so therefore, why should I? And that really gets in the way of creating that culture where people are thinking about phishing or having somebody follow them into a room or making sure I log off when I walk away from my computer.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Chris Apgar, CEO and President, Apgar & Associates.
Well, really, it was one of those situations where it sort of fell in my lap. I was the Y2K project manager for a health plan in the Northwest, and when we were getting close to Y2K, I got a call at home from my boss in the middle of the summer in '99. He said, "I've got your next job. You're going to be our HIPAA compliance officer. I don't know what it is. You figure it out." And so I instantly became the HIPAA compliance officer for the health plan as well as their security officer. And those things went from there. I worked there for 6 years, and then in 2004 decided to go off on my own and started Apgar & Associates. And we've been going strong for 16 years now. And I really enjoy the work. I've had a good time at it. I enjoy the folks that I work with. It's a fascinating field, and I'm glad it sort of fell in my lap.
So you've seen a lot of different organizations that have been dealing with healthcare security for quite a while in your career, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah. It's a nice wide variety because we work with health plans, hospitals, practices, and right now predominantly our clientele are vendors. A lot of them are software development companies.
So you wrote a great piece for the CISO Compass book, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers. And your piece was called Security and Senior Management. Buyin is critical for success. So would you like to walk us through that?
Sure. The thing that is really critical, if you want to create a sound security program, then you need the senior buy-in for several different reasons. One of them is, there's got to be an investment by the company into information security rather than just it's this thing over here. It's a cost center. We're not going to worry about it. So senior management needs to come in and say this is important to the organization and show that through their leadership that this is important. It's also important when it comes to creating that culture of sound information security. If you don't have the senior leadership basically saying, this is what we need to do as a company and as an organization to protect ourselves, our patients, and so forth. If you don't have that, then people look to senior leadership and they say, oh, well, that's not important. You're not taking it seriously, so therefore, why should I? And that really gets in the way of creating that culture where people are thinking about phishing or having somebody follow them into a room or making sure I log off when I walk away from my computer. Those are the kinds of things that people, if they don't see somebody setting an example for them, then they're going to start to believe that it's not really important to them or to the organization.
So making sure that the senior executives are having to go through all the training and that they're subject to the same phishing campaigns. Is that one of the things that's very important?
It is. They need to have, it gets back to the dedication, but it's also, in a lot of respects, it's as senior management, they can sometimes be more vulnerable, especially, and a good example would be phishing, as I've worked with organizations where they'll run a phishing campaign, and inevitably it will be one or two of the C-suite people that fall for the phishing exercise. So it's important that they get the same instructions.
Yeah, I've seen that too, and I've also seen where it's difficult to track them down in terms of the getting the compliance together with some of the senior executives. Have you found that to be more of a challenge sometimes as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with organizations. Like one that comes to mind is the healthcare marketing and research company. And I've worked with them until they were acquired last year. I was their virtual CISO, and when I first started working with them, it was to the extent that they wanted to go out and sell. They didn't really care about anything else. This security thing, this compliance thing was basically a nuisance to them. And it took the replacement of the CEO to really get the organization on to a point where they really took information security seriously, and they ended up doing a very good job. And I think that's one of the things that helped them get acquired, is they were able to fully demonstrate that they really did take it seriously. Because the other thing to think about, if you're not a covered entity, if you're, say, a vendor, one of the things about information security and compliance is it has become a market driver. So in the marketplace out there, is basically saying, if you want to compete, if you want to get clients, especially in the healthcare space, say you want a large health plan as a client, or a large hospital, you need to be able to prove to them that you're doing a good job as far as information security is concerned. And it also becomes somewhat of a marketing tool where I can say, hey, look, this is all of what I've done. I've done a SOC 2 audit, or I've gone through high trust. I've got this documentation I can show you. So from that perspective, it's even more of a market driver on the vendor side of things.
So how do you get executives to make that switch to to get them from, we're seeing that this is as you indicate in your article, where it's not just a cost or risk avoidance, but how do you get them to make that pivot over to see that this could be something that could be a market driver?
Well, in the from a I see that as more of a challenge from a covered entity standpoint. Vendors are more and more getting it. I've seen a significant change over the last 10 years on the vendor side of things, where they've basically come to realize that, if I want to compete in this space, if I want these clients, then I need to make an investment and be able to demonstrate that I've got sound security. Now, on the covered entity side, it's sort of hit and miss. It's like just recently, and this is dealing with a small practice, small specialist practice. And one of the things that was the hardest for me to get through was, if the physician who basically owns the practice doesn't take it seriously, you're not going to get the staff to take it serious. Now, that's still the verdict is not in yet as far as whether the physician is taking it seriously or not. But that is a challenge when we're coming to like hospitals and so forth. The other problem that I've seen with especially larger entities is, especially like say a hospital or a healthcare delivery system, is sometimes with those particular entities, it's a combination of we want to make money, and security is not a money maker per se, and sometimes it's more arrogance. It's the, well, we know best, and we're not going to call anybody in. And in those particular situations, it is really difficult to convince senior management that this is a serious endeavor, and you just cross your fingers and hope.
So what sort of things would you look for if you were, say, looking at a vendor? What sort of things would be signs to you that this vendor has taken security seriously?
Well, when we're brought in, oftentimes, at least initially, they're not even close. When I do go into an organization that has, in essence, taken it seriously, when I interact with, say, senior management around these issues, they do take it seriously, because it's when I have a conversation with somebody, it's evident fairly quickly whether they take it seriously or not. It's as an example, there's a hospital that we work with in California that for the first probably 4 or 5 years we worked with them, we would conduct a risk analysis for them, and for them it was merely an exercise for meaningful use dollars. They didn't take it seriously. Now they've evolved since then, and they're more and more taking it seriously. But it was more during that period of time, it was more of a we'll get the report because we have to get the report so we can get our money, and then we'll put it on the shelf and we won't do anything about it. So we would come back year after year, and we'd have the same findings.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers. The same findings year after year. So,
yeah.
So, what do you do to change that? Because I think there's a lot of organizations that are out there that go through the same exercise each year, and they've got it on their list of things to do, but these initiatives never get funded.
Right.
So what advice would you give for that?
It's pointing out. I mean, one of the things that we have an advantage of because we're external is we can come in and say, this, and this, or you got problems here, and after a certain point, it gets down to putting in the report saying, this is a repeat finding. This represents willful neglect. You don't want OCR to get a hold of this. I even at one point a few years back, I came into an organization. It was an anesthesiology group, and when I went back to do their risk assessment again, it was all the same stuff. Nothing had been done, and I just basically aborted the whole thing. I said, "You don't want me to write the report because this is a significant liability for you. If you're not doing it, you're not taking it seriously." So sometimes it's sort of using the stick approach where look, I'm the external guy. It's in writing now. Guess what? Something goes wrong. You're the ones on the hook for it. A real good example of how that played out was you look at MD Anderson in Texas, where they were fined a significant amount of money because they said, hey, this is important, which in this particular case was encryption. They said it was important, but it took them 3 or 4 years to roll it out. And during that period of time, there were like 3 or 4 breaches because the laptops were unencrypted and they were stolen. So that was, that's sort of a poster child. But one of the things that I find somewhat fascinating is we have had a lot of headlines about, well, you didn't do a risk analysis. I mean, it was gastroenterology clinic or practice not that long ago that was fined $100,000 because not only did they not do a risk analysis when they were given support and help from OCR, they basically ignored it. And so it ended up they got fined because they didn't make any effort to, in essence, do their risk analysis and put policies in place, things like that. And it surprises me that you get that many people or that many headlines about organizations that have had been civilly penalized, or they've been monetary settlement has been reached, and it still seems to fall on deaf ears in some respects.
Yeah, and it's something. When I was looking at this, I noticed that it was the number 1 and 2 issues were about risk analysis and risk management.
Right.
Even though organizations may have been doing some of the security controls, they weren't really taking a regular holistic look to see if they really were doing the right things or not.
Right.
So where are some of those things that, I mean, you've seen a lot, over the years. I mean, what are some of those things that you see now that you were seeing 16 years ago that organizations still don't have in place?
Getting down to even the basics. I mean, some places don't even have policies and procedures, or what they've done is they've downloaded a set of policies and procedures, but they haven't even put their name on it. It just says organization or something like that. I've run into that off and on. They're not conducting a risk analysis. I mean, the small practice I was referring to, They've been around since the 80s. And when I went in to do the risk analysis a few months ago, that was the first time they'd done it. And they only did it because they were involved in a lawsuit over something else. And the person that was brought in to basically clean up the mess said, you really have to do this. So it took basically a lawsuit to get them to do that. And that's not that uncommon, especially with smaller entities. Even though there is the free tool from the Office of National Coordinator for Health Information Technology out there that you can use, and is specifically geared towards small to medium-sized providers, there's just, and I think there are different reasons why that's true, but that's something that I still continue to see on the provider side of things. On the vendor side of things, what I see is before like a startup is serious about compliance or security, it's one of those where they'll go for a few years and then they will find that in order to compete in the market, they've got to prove something, and then they have to scramble and go back and rework things because they didn't think about security up front. It was, I got a cool idea, I'm going to go out and sell it, but there was no real thought given to baking in information security. So that's even true today.
Do you think that a lot of it comes down to funding, or is it do you think it's just a lack of desire, or is it a lack of skill sets?
I think it can be all of the above. On the provider side, it's more of we don't want to spend the money, or we don't have the money to spend, like say for a smaller entity. When you get into the vendor side of things, I see a couple of things happening there. One is they don't take it seriously at the beginning until they finally get dinged by a client or a potential client. The other thing that I see with vendors is they want to sell something. So I'm a software developer, or I'm heading up a startup. I want to get something out in the market. So I'm going to build something cool. I'm going to sell it. And then later I'll think, oh, maybe I should have thought about information security. And then they have to retrofit things. So it gets costly in the long run for them because they didn't think about it up front. And the ones that I do enjoy working with, or we just talked to one a few days ago where they're at the very beginning stages and they said, okay, we want to make sure we're doing this correctly. So come in and help us build a roadmap of what we need to accomplish in order to hit the market and be prepared to respond to requests for information about their security program.
Yeah, and I think we saw, during the sudden impact of, COVID-19 and everybody working from home and telemedicine, where companies were looking at someday they would invest in telemedicine. Well, now all of a sudden someday was next week.
That's true.
And so, it was like a mad rush. And, we saw some of those products, getting a lot of press time in terms of their security models and quickly adapting to those as well.
Yeah, it's one of those, like with Zoom is a great example. I mean, Zoom responded very well to that. They had issues, but it was one of those where I don't think that Zoom anticipated the explosion of its use. So some have reacted rather well. One of the things that I do, I have been fairly impressed with is, given the chaos and everything going on and the sudden we've got to move to telework or telehealth, there were a significant number of organizations that did a good job.
Yeah, I've actually been on a few of those calls myself, the telemedicine calls, and it's, very interesting. And it's also very interesting, I think, how if we look at the technology today, some of the wearables and how, some of them are capturing, EKGs and stuff that the doctors are actually wanting to see. and are actually relying on those other technologies as indicators. And I think, it just, when I think of those sorts of developments, just the whole idea of this ecosystem is just getting larger and larger, and the importance of every vendor along the way is going to have that security built into those products.
Right. Yeah, and I was thinking back, 6 years ago, I was on a panel, and we were talking about the Internet of Things, and at that point in time, all of the panelists, including myself, said, it's still in its infancy. It's got a ways to go. This is 6 years later, and it's like this vast explosion of IoT devices.
Yes. Yeah. So we can never get started too early on security.
No.
So what sort of other advice would you give us for, making sure that we're getting that buy-in and sustaining that buy-in with the senior management in our organizations, and particularly in healthcare organizations?
For me, it takes an ongoing focus on, making sure that the senior management is communicating the importance of information security, and not just because it keeps us from getting sued, but just from the perspective of, let's take care of this individual's information, and let's not expose it to somebody else, and let's not expose ourselves as an organization to ransomware or whatever. And I think that's a continuous message that needs to come from the top down to basically say, this is important to us. And it could be in the form of a periodic email out. I mean, we've got a large client who's a health plan, and their CEO on a regular basis will send something out about the importance of privacy, the importance of security, things like that. So, you're getting it from the very top to provide that message to folks. And it's one of those where there also needs to be that investment from a senior management perspective on doing things like mock phishing exercises, making sure your policies are updated, doing the risk assessment, providing training to staff. One of the things that sometimes frustrates me is everybody will sit through the same exact training year after year after year. And after the first one or two times, eyes are going to glaze over and people aren't going to listen anymore. There needs to be some dynamic effort to inform, to keep people apprised, doing things like that mocking phishing exercise, or just hey, we had this headline come up. This is sort of to highlight why we do the things we do, because we don't want to be like them. But it's got something that's got to be ongoing. It can't be just a once a year we sit you down and you've got to go through your HIPAA training and then you're good to go for the rest of the year, because oftentimes too, HIPAA training doesn't concentrate on the things that I think are important, what I would call the practical issues like social media, encryption, phishing, mobile devices, those kinds of things. To me, the training needs to be practical and not here's an iteration of, I'll restate what the security rule says. I won't really equate it to, okay, well, what is your risk today? What are the things that you need to worry about? What are the things you need to do to safeguard information?
I think that's great advice, and I've always been a huge advocate for very interactive, impactful security awareness programs, because I think we have to keep changing it up. So great advice. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure talking with you today. Thanks again for your contribution to the CISO Compass book, and for helping other CISOs. And these are very important things to share, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for reaching out, Todd. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.